We've set up the basic scene for the rig, but there are still some more details which we need to handle before we start adding the actual solvers. First, I'll take a look at the delete joints for my controls. I selected the joints manually, but we can make this more efficient and more readable. To do this, I'll use a wildcard for the start of the name. This way we'll select anything that has a name that finishes in leg 2. There are actually a couple of points which you can remove which are not related to the legs. These are the root joints for the head and abdomen. These joints will not be used in this half of the IK setup. Generally, any points that are not translated can be removed from the setup. But there is an exception, and that would be the roots for the legs, and these are needed for the IK solver. I can add these points to the current selection, and I'll have to repeat my simplification for the legs. Every joint in the control rig setup now has a control attached to it, with the only exceptions being the leg roots. Now the next thing to look at is our skeleton. I have deleted the points which are only going to be used for controls. However, at this point I've changed my mind on a certain aspect of the rig. Currently all the leg roots are the children of the abdomen, and I don't really want the abdomen's rotation to affect the legs. The rig setup would be cleaner if they were the children of the center of gravity. So I'm going to get a reparent joints node. I will have one operation. The parent in this case would be the center of gravity. This will be the parent of the leg roots. I'll replace the start of the name with an asterisk. We will now be selecting anything with leg root as the second half of the name. This should leave us with what will be our final exported skeleton. I'll want to get a null to define this point to make export easier. I'll name this null rig skeleton, and I'll change its shape to be a bone. There are a few reasons for explicitly marking this point as the skeleton. One of them is that we need to decide how we're going to work with our root bone. There are two ways I can calculate the root bone. The first would be at the start of the rig, and we'd base all the rig's movement off the root bone initially. The second option would be to animate the rig without the root bone and to add it afterwards. Since the second method is slightly more easy to implement than the first, I'll be working with that method. Because of this, I'll no longer need the root bone at this point in the rig. So I'll get a delete joints node and I'll delete the root joint. I'll then do some renaming in my network. We've cleaned up the skeleton, and now I'm going to work on my IK controls. We need to manipulate our IK controls. To do this, I'm going to get a rig pose node. With this node, I only want to see the controls themselves. So to do this, I'll get a visibility node. The attached control geometry node creates an attribute which contains all the joints which have controls attached to them, as well as a set of attributes for each individual control. The main attribute will be called KineFX controls. We will use this attribute and specify display non-selected. I'll need to get the display to refresh, and we should now see that only my controls are visible. So the first operation we'll be working on will be to move the center of gravity control and have the skeleton follow with it. But when I move the control, we'll see that all the other controls follow with it automatically. This is because the controls are all currently part of a hierarchy that has been derived from the rig itself. We do not necessarily want this. Instead, we want to specify the hierarchy for the controls ourselves. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a neutral hierarchy for the controls. To do this, I'll get a reparent joints node. I'll rename this node to reparent root. For this rig, the global control will be the root control. Every control should be beneath this control. So we'll set the root to be the parent, and we'll set everything to be the child. Now if we move the center of gravity, there'll be no objects that follow it. We'll change this as we progress through the rig, but for now this will allow us to focus on the center of gravity exclusively. and in the next video we'll work on the solver for the center of gravity.